A really warm welcome to you all. A very good evening to students and staff and guests at the NFTS. I'm really sorry I can't be with you, but this is as up close and personal as I can get to welcome you all. I just wanted to start by saying that this movie has been a part of my life almost as long as I can remember. Dad was first asked by a civil servant in the Indian High Commission to direct a film about Gandhi in 1963. And he replied, "You're insane, I've never directed a movie in my life." And the man just kept saying, no, but you don't understand, you're the man to direct a film about Gandhi. And obstinately stuck to his case, and in the end, won Dad over, and Dad indeed committed himself to doing it. The next big landmark was about 6 years later when he did direct his first movie, Oh, What a Lovely War, quickly followed by Young Winston, and then two movies financed and produced by a legend of the industry called Joseph E. Levine, who said that he would finance Gandhi, but he wanted Dad to direct this epic movie beforehand called A Bridge Too Far, which Dad did direct. Then having done that, he said, well, actually, maybe you could just do another little small intimate movie for me, and then I'll do Gandhi. So in order to get this film made, Dad agreed, and he shot a film called Magic, which is a rather wonderful film about a ventriloquist featuring an extraordinary performance from Anthony Hopkins. And then Dad turned around to Joe Levine and said, what about this movie? At which point Joe Levine did not come up with the money. And merely repeated the same kind of problems and issues that Dad had faced for a long, long time, namely that financiers were worried that the subject simply wasn't commercial. And the other problem was that anybody who wanted to put money up for the movie, including Joe Levine, wanted a big star, understandably, to play Gandhi. But there were no Indian stars, film stars at that point. And so all the names that were explored and indeed screen tested were white actors, which even then seemed absurd, and now, of course, would be completely unacceptable. And then riding on a white charger over the horizon arrived a wonderful company called Goldcrest, who said that they would provide and find all the money for the film. And they gave Dad two absolutely priceless gifts. One was director's cut, and two, the freedom not to cast a big star as Gandhi. At which point, yours truly here stepped in, because Dad said to me, who's that Royal Shakespeare Company actor that you insist I should be casting as Gandhi? And I reminded him that this man was called Ben Kingsley. And I duly took him to see Ben in a show in the West End at the RSC in a Bertolt Brecht play, actually a Bertolt Brecht play of incredible boredom, but it did contain a fantastic performance from Ben, which led to Dad screen testing him twice, and eventually, as everybody will know, casting him and him winning an Oscar for his wonderful performance. Ben, as you will know, is half Indian, and his real name is Ben Banji. While I'm on the quite disgraceful train of boasting, I can also tell you that I was responsible for the man who wrote the music for the movie. I had found the most wonderful young composer called George Fenton. Dad said this was no use to him because Carl Davis and Ravi Shankar were going to do the music together. And then suddenly at the last minute, Ravi Shankar and Carl Davis fell out. The whole thing was off. Dad listened to a tape I'd given him of George's music, and George was hired. And again, the rest is history. And he went on to do a lot of movies for Dad and indeed for my Uncle David on the various nature programs. The last piece in the jigsaw for tonight, I have to tell you, of course, is this extraordinary man whom you're seeing tonight, Billy Williams. You only have to look at the list of credits that Billy has to see what a legend he is in the British film industry, what a brilliant artist he is. And I know how thrilled Dad was that he was able to do Gandhi. One interesting little thing that happened to me was that Dad was asking me about the pace of the movie. And there was one section in it that I thought was too long and that I was suggesting he trim. And he said, you might be right, but before we settle on it, have a look at it again on a big screen. So he organized for me to look at it on a big screen. And what held this sequence, which doesn't have any dialogue in it at all, and is all about Gandhi exploring India in its ravishing detail, you see the cinematographic genius of Billy. And Dad was right. When you look at it on a Panavision screen, you suddenly realize actually that the drama and the journey and the pace was right. It just wasn't right on a very, very small screen, which of course it was never intended for. Billy's work is quite wonderful and quite brilliant. And I know Dad was completely devoted to him and to his genius. So I do hope you enjoy this movie that took from 1963 to 1983 to move from theory into practice. And I wish you well, have a wonderful evening, and relish yourselves in the company of the wonderful Billy Williams. Have a wonderful time.
So now I have to say to you, how did Gandhi come your way?
Well, it was the early summer of 1980, and I was about to go to New Hampshire to film on Golden Pond. And I got a call from Richard Attenborough. Would I come along and meet him at his home, Beaver Lodge in Richmond? I had previously worked with Richard just for 2 or 3 days on Young Winston when Jerry Turpin was sick. But other than that, I hadn't had any experience with him. And I met him at his lovely home, and he gave me this enormous script and said, I'd like you to photograph this for me. It's Gandhi. And I took it home and read it. I stayed up all night to read it. And I knew that Dickie was going to India the next day, so I sent him a cable and I just said, yes, love, Billy. And then I went off to New Hampshire. Well, I didn't hear anything for a very long time, and I wondered if the film was going ahead. And I think they were putting the final financial things into place. And so in October, I flew to India with Ben Kingsley, and he went to fast, lose some weight, and to learn how to spin. And I had a very generous pre-production time when I had the opportunity to study the landscape and the lighting conditions, to visit as many locations as possible, and to also view a lot of archive footage of Gandhi from the 20s and 30s. There was quite a lot, mostly black, well, it was black and white, of course. And Richard, once we got working, I realized, what an inspirational leader he was. And he was also absolutely tireless, the work ethic, and he knew what he wanted. That was what was so good. And he was so good with the actors that there are scenes here that are so overwhelming and so beautifully played. And of course, Ben Kingsley was just, there are no words to describe how good his performance was. I mean, it's probably one of the greatest performances in screen history. He was 36 years old, and he played Gandhi from when he was in his mid-20s until he died. And he did, the whole essence of the performance is his acting, But he was also supported by a wonderful makeup artist called Tom Smith. And as he aged, Tom Smith painted his face. The only prosthetics he used was to push his ears forward at the back a little bit. Otherwise, it was all done with makeup and performance. And I remember we were doing one scene when he'd been fasting and he was in his 70s. And we were on a rooftop, night exteriors in Bombay, and we just lined up the shot. And I said to Ben, I said, we're going a little while setting up. Would you like to sit down? And he just smiled at me and nodded me in the Indian fashion. He was 36, and I was convinced he was the old man. Once he came on set, he was the character, and that was it. And it was a joy working with him. But also, we had a wonderful cast. I mean, Roshan Seth, who plays Nehru, and Ben's wife, Kasturba, were Indian actors. And a lot of of course, all the Indian cast were Indians, when that was wonderful. And of course, we had a guest list, if you like, of British actors that playing short roles. But of course, initially the first thing I was concerned about was having my crew. And I'd had a wonderful camera crew for many years with David Harcourt operating and Ted Deason focus, Danny Shelmerdine loading, George Cole gaffer. Well, my operator had retired. He'd reached 65, and he said, I don't think I can take the film in India. So I found a new operator, Chick Hanstis, who'd been working with Freddie Young, and he did an excellent job. The equipment was Panavision, and we had two Panavision, I think they were gold, and Danny might remember what they were. He's here tonight.
Danny Shelmerdine, just
Danny
stand
Shelmerdine.
up. Danny Shelmerdine, who's
Danny
the
Shelmerdine
loader.
was Papaloader on the whole picture.
Stand up, stand up, stand up. And where's Jamie? Where's Jamie?
No, Jamie Harcourt. He was a camera crew on the aerial photography.
Stand up, stand up.
And Jamie is David Harcourt's son, and we've worked together a great deal. And it's so terribly important to have a supportive crew who understand what you need without you having to cross every T and dot every I. They know just by looking at you how you want things done. And so over the years I've been very fortunate that I've had a wonderful crew. But also I found that sometimes when you have to move abroad, work with other crews, that film crews, they love what they're doing. We love our work. It's a very rewarding and satisfying occupation. And we get a chance to travel and meet different people and different cultures. So I feel very happy that I've had such a good time.
Can I ask you something about prep? Because those, I know in the back row there, they would love to know about this. How do you prep a movie like Gandhi?
Well, as regards the gear, it came down to the budget. Samuelson serviced the film, so I had all the camera gear I wanted, which was two Panaflexes, one as a backup, because all the dialogue scenes were shot with one camera. And we only used the second camera, which I would then operate, and Danny would come up to focus to do pick-up shots or extra shots when we had big crowds. And the lighting equipment was supplied by Samuelson's, and they wanted their gaffer to do the picture. His name was Alan Martin, and we'd never worked together before. But he turned out to be a very supportive and a very helpful, dedicated gaffer. And, he made a big contribution to the film. But I wanted to take the Chapman Titan crane, which I'd used on many occasions, especially in rough ground, because it was a six-wheel vehicle, go anywhere, set up in just a few minutes. And Terry Clegg was the production controller on Gandhi, and you know, was watching the pennies all the time. And I said, well, good, could we have the Titan? He said, no. He said, it's going to take 6 weeks to ship it there, we can't afford it. But there's a new crane being developed, and Sidney Samuelson wants to come along to Cricklewood to have a look at it. So I went along with the grip and to the flat roof in Cricklewood, and this new crane was called the Lumar.
Wow.
And it was the first crane which could be independently operated without the camera. You had the remote head with the camera hanging underneath the crane. And this was the first model. And it was set up on the flat roof and demonstrated. And I said, well, this is what we're taking, because you can take pieces and put it in a couple of boxes. So that was the crane that we were given to use. Well, I'd like to go back to some of the preparation time, because we wanted to capture the man and his life and his place in history, but also the landscape and the life of the Indian people. So I visited many places, and Richard Attenborough had insisted that wherever possible, we film wherever these things happened. And that, largely, we were successful in doing that, but there were a couple of places where it didn't work out. And one was the courtroom in Bombay, where Gandhi is sentenced to prison for 6 years. And we went to this courtroom, and with wonderful production designer Stuart Harris, they said, yes, we can shoot here. Well, we couldn't get permission, and it went on and on and on, and with no luck at all. And in the end, he said, we'll shoot it in England. And so Stuart Craig created the identical courtroom in Staines Town Hall. And Trevor Howard was the judge. Yeah. It's a marvellous scene. And the other occasion was that later on in the film, Ben Gandhi is summoned by the Viceroy. The Viceroy is the King's representative in India, with enormous power, and Ben is summoned to meet him. And he arrives and proceeds up this wonderful step. The shot starts with a close-up of a sandal on one step and pulls back to see this little man in the loincloth going up the steps into the palace, the Viceroy's palace. Well, the Viceroy's palace is now home of the President of India, and the President of India was not in favour of the film. And so we couldn't shoot there. And we finished up in the Institute of Directors in Pall Mall. We shot all those scenes in London with John Gielgud as the Viceroy. But we did have a wonderful location manager who succeeded very well in fixing most of the locations, because there are a couple of things that India inherited from the British. One was the railways, and the other is the bureaucracy, and that everything requires a rubber stamp. Well, Graham Ford, the location manager, had this brilliant idea of having 2 rubber stamps. So whenever a document was agreed, he'd stamp it first of all with Graham Ford, location manager, and then get out a second stamp and stamp it Indo-British Films, and that carried a lot of weight.
Was there anything, when you read the script, was there anything that concerned you photographically? and challenged you?
Well, first of all, I mean, the script was the best script I'd ever read. I'd done 2 pictures with Jack Briley before, who wrote the screenplay, and this was just a magnificent script. Well, it's just overwhelming. It was so full of history and detail, and I was just completely absorbed. I was completely involved in the film. I mean, it was just the biggest opportunity I'd ever had, and a film that I was completely committed to in every sense of what the man was saying about life and you know, non-violence. Yeah, we need a few more of him.
We certainly do. But so there was nothing when you read that script. There was nothing there you thought, "Oh, hang on a minute, how am I going to do this?" Or
no, I mean, I think you sort things out as you go along. You visit the location, and you know, see how the light behaves, where the sun rises and sets, and just engage the place and try and capture what that place is about.
you have a lot of sunrises that are just like oil paintings. They're beautiful oil paintings.
Yeah.
Panavision scope, was that always in your mind?
It was always going to be Panavision, yes, yes. I'd like to just tell you about the first day of the shoot. Is that any first day is a real test for everybody, because you know, you're all coming together. Some of you might not have worked together before, and you've got to get the day's work. And the first day was a big scene where it's set in South Africa, where the miners are going on strike, and Gandhi is leading them in their quest for a proper pay and all that sort of thing. And the South African owner of the mine is opposing their requests. So we start with shots looking towards the crowd, with Ben leading the striking miners. And I'm always very conscious of the direction of light when I'm working on location. I don't like working with front light. I like cross light or 3/4 backlight. So I started looking east towards Ben, and we shot all the scenes, the crowd scenes, in the morning, and then we turn round when the crowd is charged by mounted policemen. And by that time, of course, the light was a cross light, 3/4 backlight, looking west. Well, before we started the film, we had a ceremony of the film being blessed by a Hindu priest, and we were all garlanded with marigolds. And so we didn't start shooting till 11 o'clock. Oh. And we were doing well, and I said to Dickie, I said, we're not going to get all the coverage on this scene. I said, let's leave all the close-ups, and I'll light the close-ups, but as long as we get all the scenes, you know, the major scenes and the action, which we did, and of course then it got dark, and so I had 2 brutes, and one brute was, of course, the sunlight, the fields in sodden sunlight, and a big 6-meter white reflector.
Yeah.
And I just bounced the other brute off that, and I lit it that way to match the rest of the material scene, and we got the day's work. So we were off to a good start.
Where was the film processed?
It was first at Technicolor London, yes.
So
We sent the rushes back every day or two, and we didn't see them for about 3 or 4 days. So we worked very long days. We left. I used to travel with Dickie in this white Ambassador, Morris Oxford car. They're everywhere in India, and we'd leave at 7 and we'd get back about 7 at night as a rule, and then we'd watch rushes. So they were quite long days. Yeah.
5-6 day week?
I don't think we work. Yes, we work 6-day week. Yes, yeah.
So there's some questions we hope from the background.
Yes.
There's a microphone back there, I believe. Essie, are you on?
Does anyone have any questions? I'm the mic holder.
Yes. I have to process my question. No, I need to.
Okay. Owen.
Owen has a question for you.
Hi Billy.
Hello.
How did you find your crew or your local crew for this film?
Well, we had a wonderful production department. We had two, in fact. We had one English department and another Indian one. And the Indian production department took care of all the transport, the crowd scenes, and the Indian crew. Because in addition to the camera crew, I had a gaffer, a best boy, and a Jenny man. And of course, we had an English sound crew. But all the rest were Indian. Indian electricians. We had a wonderful second unit director cameraman called Govind Nihalani, who did some lovely work, including the scene of the partition of India, which he also directed. And Jamie was involved in the filming of that scene, and it's one of the best scenes in the film, and he was director cameraman on that scene. And, you know, I don't think he got sufficient credit, as so often happens with the second unit. They often do some, you know, very important work, not always much recognised. But the English and the Indian crew, they integrated very well. And I think something the English crew learnt from the Indians was that you don't waste any material. Like you don't throw away gelatine, you use it again. So it was a very good co-production in that sense, because we had a big Indian crew. And of course the crowds, as you'll see, are the biggest that's ever been in any movie. And there were lots of very big crowd scenes. I mean, and how they all managed it from the production side, the transportation side is just incredible.
How long did it take?
It took it was either 21 or 22 weeks, and it would cost either 21 or 22 million, but I always get mixed up. But it finished on schedule and on budget. And that was, of course, true to Richard knowing what he wanted and being such a wonderful director. And also, he was so well liked and respected by the crew, and you know, he had a wonderful sense of fun, and it was just a delight to work with. And he was tireless, absolutely tireless leader.
Any other? Yeah, Rue?
Hello. So just coming back to the what you were talking about, watching the rushes. I'm guessing for some shots you would kind of continually move location, and the rushes would get sent to you. Did you have like a projector or like a kind of little theatre room that would?
Oh yes, we had a proper setup with the projector, and the rushes were synced. You see, the editor was in London. John Bloom was in London, and so he would see the rushes, and just sync them up and send us everything. And we did that, you know, most evenings. So that was the best part of the day, of course, really, just to sit back and enjoy what you've been doing a few days before.
Good.
And then I guess when you, how much time would you spend on it, and then I guess sleep? Like how much would you, before waking up the next day to go back?
What time do you get to bed at night?
Oh, pretty late. Yes.
B.
So as Gandhi ages,
as you didn't have prosthetics, did your approach to lighting his face change to capture that?
As much as I could, but Ben had a very smooth face. You know, he didn't have a lot of wrinkles, it all had to be painted in. And what's extraordinary is that how good the makeup was, because we still used the big close-ups, as you'll see later on. We didn't shy away from going in close. And I mean, I tried to light him to look older as much as possible, but the main work was done with the acting and the makeup for that aging process, yes.
Mr. Bruce has a question.
Hi Billy, I've got two if I can. So the first one is that David Tomlin was the first AD. So I'm curious how that worked with David, who was known as a bit of a sergeant major, yourself, and Dickie as the kind of triangle. How was there any issues there in terms of maintaining the day and staying on track?
David Tomlin.
Yeah.
David Tomlin was the first assistant director, and he was terrific. I mean, he was really on top of everything. And he had a very good crew with him, second and third assistants. We had a first-class crew, and we got on very well. I mean, there were times when Dickie had to leave the set to go and meet some politician in Congress because there was so much political opposition to the film. And how he dealt with that, I don't know. But so sometimes he would just disappear and we would carry on setting up until he came back. But David Tomlin made a huge contribution to the film, yes.
Okay, and my second question, if I can, is you mentioned that once you sent the rushes off, you would get them back 2 or 3 days later. So how did you handle any problems that might occur if you needed to do a pickup or there was an issue to do with the scene? Or were you able to go back and do things, or did you just have to march forward and that was that?
There were very few occasions that we had to do that, but on the occasions that we did have to do a pickup, it was due to the Lumar crane. Because when we started using it, we found, first of all, it took an awfully long time to set up. And the weather conditions in India are that in the morning, it's very still and the light is clear. And then as it warms up, the wind increases, and that increases the dust. And sometimes it gets quite windy later in the day. And I remember the first time we used the crane, that it was up quite high, and I thought, looks to me like it's wobbling a little bit. And it was. And of course, we didn't really, because we were only looking at a small monitor, we didn't realise how significant it was. When we got the rushes back, we found that it was too unsteady to use. So there were a couple of occasions when we retook things. And then, of course, it was a French-designed crane, and the technician, the designer, came out and tweaked a few things, but it didn't solve the problem. And so we had a second day when things went so well, and I said to Dickie, we can't carry on with this taking a chance every time we use the crane if it's windy. And we finished up using an antique crane from Bollywood, from the studios in Bombay, which took about 10 men to push it, and everything was manual. But it was stable, and there's a wonderful picture of the crew on this ancient crane with Dickie in the forehelm with his straw hat on. And so we abandoned the Lumar. And of course, it just wasn't quite ready. I mean, they fixed it eventually, but we were the guinea pigs.
Yeah.
Other than that, the equipment was fine, except that I'd been restricted to how much electrical gear I could take. And when we got to the big night exteriors and I needed more brutes, they had the brutes, but they didn't have any cable. Because when they film in India, they set up the lamp near the camera with the generator next to the lamp, because they shoot everything mute. It's post-sync afterwards. So we had to send for a lot of cable. But other than that, the equipment was fine, yes. The Panavision cameras were fine and everything else was fine, yeah.
Any other questions at all? Yes.
Really, I'm only married into the film business. My interest is more psychology, but you talk about illuminating a film, a story, but you mentioned several times that there was political opposition to this film in India. How powerful has this film been, in your view, to change perceptions and views? Has it been a really positive outcome, would you say?
Well, one would like to think it has. The film is still being showed worldwide. And of course it was largely due to Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India, who was the daughter of Pandit Nehru, the first Prime Minister. It was largely due to her that the film was made, because she got us all sorts of permissions and also a certain amount of financial investment. I would like to think that the film makes people think about how you solve international problems, but sadly, I mean, when you look around, it's very difficult to say that that's accepted worldwide. Conflicts still seem to be finished the hard way.
Okay. Any other questions there? No. Okay.
Hi Billy, I have one question. How did you manage the massive scenes with loads and loads of extras and a massive amount of crew? How did you plan everything, like every shot and every detail beforehand?
Well, there are a lot of scenes with enormous crowds, and a lot of them would paid a very modest sum of money and free water to spend all day sort of sitting or standing around. But that was left the Indian production managers, and they fixed all the crowds, and they were substantial, of course. I know there's one particular occasion when we were shooting a scene called the Salt March, where we needed 5,000 people to march to the sea. And we were in Goa, which is a Christian Portuguese area. And we went, or the production went to the local priest and said, can you get us a crowd of 5,000? And we will give you $5,000, which went to build 2 classrooms for the local school. So we were putting something back in that sense. But we had about 200, up to 200, what we called frontliners, who were people in the right costumes for the period, and they were extras from Bollywood. But the other big crowds were just Indian people turning up for the day and sitting around and doing what they were told. Yes, but looking at the film again, all these years later, it's extraordinary how many people there are in the scenes and how well it was managed.
Billy, can I just remind you of the matte shot that Robin Brown and I did to help make the crowd for the funeral scene look enormous.
Yes.
And that was one weekend, I think it was the week before the film organised funeral down the Rajpath, which is the main huge street in Delhi. We set up a camera at the top of the equivalent of Admiralty Arch up high, looking down the street, and we photographed the Indian National Independence Day Parade and there were about 1 million people watching at the sides. And we shot it on about 5 or 6 lenses, all locked off. And then we left the camera there for a week, all covered up, and we came back the next weekend, which was the weekend of the film company reenacting the funeral scene. And then the laboratories afterwards stitched, I think it's the equivalent of 10 pieces of film separately stitched together, and you'll see it in the film. It blends from the railway line and the train going down, and it blends into the funeral scene. And that shot is actually 10 pieces of film all stitched together in an optical. It was quite staggering. It was a wonderful thing to do. And it was that day of the famous call sheet where there are something like 1 million people mentioned on the call sheet. It was quite wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, so I get the last question, okay? Ready for this? In your career, there's been many films. I know there are certain films that are very important to you. I'm looking here at the list. But I know things like Dream Child are close to you. You like Dream Child very much, I know that. How does Gandhi rate in all the movies that you've made? How does it rate?
Well, of course, it's the biggest, greatest film that I've been involved in terms of what it has to say, and also the successes that it achieved with 8 Oscars. My great sadness with Gandhi is that partway through the filming I got a slipped disc, and I had to leave the film to come back to London to be treated. And fortunately, my good friend Ronnie Taylor came in, and he shot a considerable part of the film, which is why it was agreed that we should share the credit. So I can't say that I photographed the whole film. I mean, I influenced the style it was going to be shot in. There was no filtration on the camera, for instance. We just used an 85 when necessary, occasional perler screen. The filming was very straightforward, and I mean, we were rooted in telling the story and capturing the man and his time in history. So that I look back on it with a feeling of achievement, I suppose, to have been involved.
Yeah.
But there have been other films where one just approaches it differently. I try to approach not just each film, but each scene.
Yes.
I remember some years ago a publicity lady coming up to me and saying, "Well, Billy, what kind of style are you going to shoot this film in?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "Well, I'm going to wait and see how the scenes are played." That's why I always find that rehearsal is so important. With a rehearsal, you see what the actors want to do, not what was written in the script. How they're going to play it, and what the emotion of the scene, and how do you capture that visually? Because I always feel we're telling the story visually, and you're engaging the audience with the camera in terms of how you compose the scene, how you light the scene, because lighting can make so much difference to the atmosphere. You've got to capture the atmosphere of the time of day and support the actors. That's something I learnt from David Harcourt, is that he's always thinking, looking after the actors, making them feel part of the crew. It's a teamwork, isn't it? If you're all pulling together in the right direction, you've got a good chance of success. Yeah.
Okay, so if you hand me that, thank you very much. I just want to say to you that for over 50 years I've been bringing him his tea. I also want to say to you that 3 weeks ago I served him lunch, and I wouldn't do that for anybody. But I also want to say, the reason that you have this gentleman is because he's married to the most wonderful lady, and that's Anne Williams.
Well, thank you, Stuart. Anne and I have been married for 67 years.
Wow. Wow.
And she has been my guide She always reads the scripts, and she's supported me throughout my career, and I love her.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.